Hello, and welcome to this webinar titled Sterile Products Manufacturing, Prepared for the Future, hosted by Biopharma Asia magazine and presented by Gert Moelgaard. My name is Sri Patel and I will be the moderator. Now, before we begin, I would just like to remind our viewers that this event will be hosting a live question and answer session at the end of the presentation. You can submit a question at any time throughout the presentation via the Questions tab located at the bottom of your screen, and we will go through these at the end of the presentation. Now, please allow me to introduce you to our presenter. Gert Moelgaard has more than 30 years' experience in the pharmaceutical and biotech industry, including Novo Nordisk, NNE Pharmaplan, an international engineering and consulting company with focus on pharma and biotech industry. He's been engaged in several projects and assignments within pharmaceutical manufacturing as well as validation and quality management. He's been engaged in international guidelines, conferences, and courses on pharmaceutical manufacturing, compliance, technology, and validation, and is now working as independent consulting at Moelgaard Consulting. I would now like to welcome our presenter, Gert Moelgaard, to join our webinar. Welcome, Gert.
Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you attending this webinar where we'll be going through the current challenges and especially some of the future challenges of sterile products manufacturing. And before we begin, I'd just like to go through some of the themes of today. First, I'll be setting the scene about the pharmaceutical industry and especially parenteral products, sterile products. Then we'll be going through aseptic processing and the movement from being a niche area to the hot spot of the future. We'll talk about the patent cliff, the so-called patent cliff, and some of the implications of it on the next generation pharma products. Then we'll talk about specialty medicines and some of the new opportunities in that area, including orphan drugs, where we'll look into what comes next with the orphan drugs and beyond. And then go a little more back to the pharmaceutical manufacturing reality as we have it today, look into some of the future technology enablers, and last but not least, look into the needed paradigm shift towards horizon like 2025 and beyond. And in the end, we'll have time for discussion. Now, just to set the scene, the pharmaceutical area of sterile products used to be a small niche area. Companies dealing with vaccines, insulins, and other special kinds of medicines were doing it for the whole life of the pharmaceutical industry, but it was a small niche area. And increasingly, I will argue that it's moving into the hot spot of the future of the pharmaceutical industry. And I will even argue that I don't think the technology and the current manufacturing capacity is well suited for these challenges of the future. We will be in the hot spot very soon, and I don't think we are ready. So I'll raise a couple of challenges and we'll have time for discussion in the end. Beside of that, there's a lot of expectations for the future of the sterile products because they will make a big difference for people in many areas of future treatments. And actually, we don't have a good track record in that regard. Aseptic processing is a major area of regulatory concern and many observations related to sterile products manufacturing facility and even situations with drug shortages where there's some products that cannot be supplied to the market because of manufacturing problems. ISPE did a study with a couple of other organizations a couple of years ago, coming out with the result that actually the majority of the drug shortage situations in the market is due to sterile products. And this report even goes into what area of the sterile products manufacturing are the most challenged, where are the biggest problems in that. We will not be going into it. I just want to make this point that there's a lot of expectations to aseptic processing of the future and not a solid track record on that we are really doing this in a robust and trustworthy manner going forward. I think we already have some challenges. Now, with that being said, I just want to remind you that the pharmaceutical industry is a very special industry. We've been going through something like 30 years of almost double-digit growth. When you compare, this is a comparison done by Deutsche Bank years ago, but it's still noteworthy that you can go back 30 years and have seen this almost 10% annual growth. year after year. So the pharmaceutical industry, we are used to having stable growth, having stable business conditions, and so on and so forth, and yet it suddenly came to an end a couple of years ago with what's called the patent cliff. But before we go to the patent cliff, I just want to say that the short-term outlook is still promising, maybe not 10% anymore, but at least something like 5, 6, maybe 7%, at least on the prescription drug sales going forward. So it's not that there's a big alarm on that now this industry is hitting a major crisis. I just want to make the point we may not be well prepared for some fundamental changes that is coming to the pharmaceutical industry of the future. And actually, when you look back, the 30 years of almost double-digit growth ended in the period from 2011 to 2012, 13, where actually we hit what was called the patent cliff. So after this almost 10% growth for many, many years, we were down to even negative growth for 1 or 2 years. And now we are into this new growth rate of something like 6%. But that patent cliff bump to the growth rate of the pharmaceutical industry was a first warning that there is something changing. I claim it was a disruption, not a patent cliff, but the term patent cliff came from the British magazine The Economist, and it comes out of that actually we are a very predictable industry. The pharmaceutical industry is relying on new products going through clinical trials, and on the other hand challenged by products losing their patent protection. And these predictions was what The Economist put together back in 2011 and even before, predicting that from 2011 we will start to see this hit of what they called a patent cliff. You can see the article in The Economist and think of what life was looking like back then, but the key thing is it was actually not a cliff, it was a disruption, I would claim. I would claim that what happened during that period of the patent cliff shift was a move away from what was called the blockbuster era into a new era that I call the specialty drugs era. The blockbuster era was dominated by a few products. Most of them were tablets or capsules, some inhalers, but it was products that were small molecule drugs for some major indications for many, many patients around the world. But after the patent cliff, we're in a new world where most of the drugs were not at all blockbusters back before the patent cliff, and their indications are much smaller because it's really specialty drugs. And the reason why The Economist foresaw a patent cliff was that they didn't see these small products becoming very big and important as we know today that they did. So the key thing is it was not a cliff, it was a disruption, and it's a warning that we haven't yet quite addressed. Let's take one more look into the pharma disruption, just to discover a couple of aspects of it. First of all, there is a big difference between the use of traditional medicines before the patent cliff, in the blockbuster era, and the use of specialty medicines, because the blockbusters were all tablets or capsules with very few exceptions. So it was a one-size-fits-all technology where machines and equipment and facilities were suited for most kind of future products coming up. But that is no longer the case. In the specialty medicine era, many of the drugs are tailored to exactly the disease that they're treating, unlike the one-size-fits-all approach that we were used to. So now there is a big difference between a specialty medicine for arthritis, a specialty medicine for cancer, and other type of special indications, sometimes even leading to that you need a drug delivery system together with the medicine. Meaning that it used to be one size fits all, now we're in a new reality where drugs are much more different and they're much more difficult to manufacture than they were in the blockbuster era. So I still claim it was actually a disruption, and it has a major impact on facilities of the future. Now, what is a specialty drug? Well, to give a short definition, it is the type of drug that you get for a chronic disease that requires not a general practitioner but a specialist. You go to one of these doctor's offices that you see in the bottom right of my slide with lots of certificates for all the specialties that the doctor has, because it's not a GP kind of treatment. It's something that requires special knowledge. For instance, within cancer, arthritis, sclerosis, many other of these specialty areas. So these specialty drugs, they are a special area, and there are not that many. When you look into the thousands of different drugs available on the market internationally, you will see that the specialty drugs, they may be one page, maybe 2 pages. If you look into a list in, for instance, a US pharmacy or a European pharmacy, there are actually not that many. And nevertheless, this is where the major growth of the pharmaceutical industry going forward is coming from. Everywhere in the world, at least in the Western world, we see that specialty medicines are growing significantly. That's actually the major growth driver at the moment. In the US, it's approaching 50% of the medical spending of prescribed medicine. In most of the European countries, it's something of the same order of magnitude, 45% maybe. You see the same in other developed countries, less in emerging economic countries, but nevertheless, a very strong trend towards this. So almost 50% of the revenue is coming from specialty medicines. And when you look into the specialty medicines for the next few years, you will see that among the top 20 most promising new drugs, again, the majority are injectables. They require aseptic processing and are done or sold as parenterals. I've shown a few examples here. Some are already on the market, some are very close to come to the market, and you see the same trend that there is a close correlation between the disease and the drug delivery system that we are not used to from the blockbuster era, where everything would just be tablets or capsules. So this is a warning of the future. I would claim we will need to see this more and more, and you will need to face it for your planning of facilities of the future. The variety and complexity of the future of pharmaceuticals products. To add to this picture, you will see a number of biosimilars starting to add up, because now we're starting to see the oldest of the biotech products running out of patent, and almost daily you see new approvals of biosimilars claiming part of the market that the blockbuster drugs of the biologic part of the market were claiming before. So we are starting to see they're taking a part of it, and I think it adds to the future need of flexibility in pharmaceutical processing, and especially in aseptic pharmaceutical processing. This is also a part of the new pharma reality, the biosimilar trends. And we see a number of them coming. I don't want to make a big presentation about biosimilars, but I just wanted to point your attention on that from a US perspective. This circle illustrates how many products are approaching approval and marketing situations. And you see for some of them, there's a significant number of biosimilars approaching. So it's going to be a very different world, requiring much more manufacturing flexibility in aseptic processing than we're used to, both in innovative and biosimilar companies. And then one last point that is a very important market trend. If you make a list, as the left illustration shows, of the biggest indications of diseases in this world, you will see at the very bottom of the whole list there is a little small group called miscellaneous. If we zoom that miscellaneous group up, you will see a big part of these are so-called orphan drugs. And I'll explain orphan drugs in just a second, but there you see exactly the same, another long tail of therapeutic areas that is some of the niche products that nevertheless have a significant revenue in each of their specialty area. So it's been an ignored area, especially from a manufacturing point of view, and it's going to play a major role in the future. Now, actually, the orphan drug sales is bigger than the sales and the sales growth in traditional medicines. So it's a very strong growth niche area. And it's continued for a number of years. You can look into not just from a US perspective, but also a European and a Japanese perspective, this growth over several years that is expected to continue into the future. And these products are very different from the normal ones, because the reason why they're called orphan drugs is that they are to treat rare diseases where a few 100,000 or sometimes even a few thousands of patients needs to be supplied, and where there's starting to be hope for a future for these groups of patients that they didn't have before. So it's become a very important part of the growth of the future of the pharmaceutical industry and market. Therefore, it's an important part of pharmaceutical manufacturing, and therefore we'll take a little look into the manufacturing of some of these orphan drugs and what they'll be in the future. You will see that when we list the top 10 selling drugs going forward towards 2022, and this is a prediction done by Evaluate Pharma, and all of my slides I have quoted where I have my sources from, but anyway, they have predicted this future revenue of some of the biggest orphan drugs, and you will notice again that roughly half of them are actually injectables, and they will need to be produced in quite small volumes as we head towards the future. Now, some of these are really complicated to manufacture, and one of my good colleagues, Jörg Zimmermann from Pharma, has demonstrated some of these challenges in a presentation in ISPE, showing a little about what are the challenges of manufacturing an orphan drug where there are really few patients, really small batches. There's a lot of focus on reducing losses of product during manufacturing, and since the products are very, very expensive, there's very little material available for doing it. So long story short, it's a totally different ball game to manufacture orphan drugs than the typical mainstream drugs, and there are very few companies capable of doing this professionally. I think this is one among many, many examples. I just wanted to show it because it's a little sign of what's going to be the pharmaceutical manufacturing challenges of the future. Small volumes, small batches, rapid changeovers, and so on, in order to bring these drugs to the market. And when we look into the future, I think we see a mega trend of small volumes for very few patients of quite expensive drugs that will be possible going forward, and that we will have to face the manufacturing challenges of. Now, I claim that this is a trend. It's even a mega trend. There will be a future long tail of pharmaceutical manufacturing where we will need to address more and more products in smaller volumes. And I didn't invent the term long tail. Actually, that comes back from the Wired magazine, the US magazine called Wired, and the former chief editor, Chris Anderson, dubbed the term long tail to describe what was happening in the electronic media area. But I think we are facing exactly the same, a long tail of not just cancer treatments, but many different treatments that will be where our future revenue comes from. Now, the observation Chris Anderson did was that half of the revenue in the electronic marketplace of, for instance, books or music or video and so on, comes from very old products that didn't exist in the previous market model. And my claim is that half of the revenue of the pharmaceutical industry will come from very small niche products that we are not well suited to produce today, but we will have to address that challenge because this trend will continue to go on. As a matter of fact, I think if you look at it from a bird's perspective, a strategic perspective, it's useful to distinguish between three horizons. where Horizon 1 is where we currently make our money. Horizon 2 is where the big growth is, so this is where we see the big business development. And Horizon 3 is the next horizon where most companies are not making that much money in the area today, but it could be the big future product area. And the concept of Horizon 1, 2, and 3 comes out of the study of disruptive technologies in many different businesses, not just pharmaceuticals. And the saying of these studies done in several places by several researchers around the world is that if you get Horizon 3 wrong, then you may end up being out of business. 1 and 2 everybody can agree on, but Horizon 3 is a very important strategic focus area. If you get that wrong, you may end up on an ice flake going south, that your business is getting smaller and smaller, and it's going to be difficult to get out of your past business model. But the traditional injectables, we don't see any significant growth in that area with few exceptions, where the specialty medicines and especially some areas like new monoclonal antibodies, new antibody drug conjugate products and so on, they are really growing strong at the moment. And then we have the breakthrough of the next generation orphan drugs and personalized medicines, where we're down to very, very small volumes, sometimes down to the individual patient volume in the future of manufacturing. So our agility and flexibility will be required to address these needs going forward, because this is where we are seeing some of the current and future breakthroughs. In short, if this perspective is right, then we need to cut costs on the traditional ones, keep developing and growing the specialty ones a few years ahead, and then keep discovering and developing what's happening in personalized treatments. That's my prediction. Now, I claim we're not well dressed up for that. I think the agility and flexibility in aseptic processing is lagging behind. And some of the major suppliers, and I've just picked an example, this is from Bosch Packaging Technology, seeing this trend that their customers need smaller and smaller batch sizes. They've seen that trend for a number of years, and they're starting to address it with some of their newer technologies, so they can bring a cycle time of cleaning and sterilizing an isolator for aseptic processing down to at least 2 hours, maybe shorter. And I think that race towards shorter changeover times will be needed. It's going to be very important for the future capacity, the future flexibility that we need in the pharmaceutical industry. And we're not there yet. There's still areas to be addressed in order to achieve the future needs. Now, some companies are starting to address it, and I will not be too specific with any of the companies. I'll show some examples here and in some of the following slides. But this is not in order to promote special companies, it's just to show that it's happening, but still to a very limited scale, and I don't think it's happening near enough to what's going to be our future needs. Because when you compare the typical situation of a pharmaceutical company, and this comes out of a real pharmaceutical company actually in Germany, if you compare their needs from a 2013 perspective to their needs with today's or yesterday's perspective, 2017, you will see that they used to have a focus on manufacturing speed, but that's no longer the challenge. The challenge is the changeover speed. Our flexibility cannot cope with the changed focus from rapid lines with high speed into rapid changeover lines where the speed is not so important. The changeover time is the main driver. And on top of that, several companies are starting to see that their product approvals are very unpredictable. This is a prediction done by AstraZeneca for some of their new products, and when they look into the future capacity needs, they see big uncertainties that also adds to the need of flexibility and agility in their manufacturing planning. And again, I don't think our current technology is well suited for that, but that will be the future need within a very short time. And last but not least, there's another aspect of agility that I want to point your attention to, because we are seeing faster drug approvals, and that's been a trend for some years. For instance, the FDA has opened up for several accelerated pathways of new drug approvals. And you may know that last year, actually, the FDA had the highest number of new drugs approved ever. And you also see a faster approval of new biosimilars and new generic drugs and so on. So there is a trend towards faster approval of new drugs, and that will add to our requirements of agility in the pharmaceutical industry. As I said, something we're not really used to, but that we will be needed to address in the future. And then, since we're talking about the FDA and the FDA's perspective, I want to add one more thing, namely that the FDA is not that confident or not that happy with the current situations in parenteral manufacturing because they think we are lagging behind. I mean, when you look into the history of technology in other areas, we are not there in the aseptic processing area. And the famous specialist within FDA in microbiology, Thomas Arista, made a presentation in ISB a couple of years ago where he made the point that he would really like to see a completely automated aseptic filling process with no human intervention. He said that would be grand indeed. And my point is, well, actually we can fulfill that promise today, but almost nobody is doing it. So the challenge going forward will be to rethink the way we do manufacturing. The FDA is into this motivation and have established a group focusing on emerging technologies and working with industry on promoting them. And one of the areas where they'd like to see this happening is exactly the one that Thomas Arista pointed to, highly automated lines with also isolator or other modern separation technologies. Could be wraps, could be other opportunities to isolate the product from human intervention. And I think we will need to see even more of that in the future without losing flexibility and manufacturing capacity. In other words, I think it's time to rethink the pharmaceutical facilities of the future. And there are some who have started doing that already. For instance, there's a group called BPOC who has a new biopharma technology roadmap. If you go to the BPOC website, you can download a number of reports addressing this future need. And I think they've been excellent in spotting some of the needs that we will need to address in the future. So that's one of the sources for you to seek inspiration of your future needs. But there are others. For instance, when you look into some of the big pharma companies, you see that in several areas of OSD, they have started to apply continuous manufacturing, modular constructions, new design principles for both the facility and the product manufacturing process. And for all of these, I think there's a lot of inspiration that we could use in the pharmaceutical aseptic part of manufacturing that we are not using yet. I think, as a matter of fact, we're lagging behind some of these innovative concepts that also applies to aseptic processing if we want to. So just to show another example, here we see a number of presentations done by pharmaceutical companies on how to make the future design of continuous manufacturing. That is one of the big drivers of much higher flexibility in the future. And we see that aseptic processing is lagging far behind what's happening in other areas of pharmaceutical manufacturing. There are exceptions, and one I want to promote, it was won the Facility of the Year award last year in ISPE. And not again to promote anybody, I just want to say that if you go to the website of facilityoftheyear.org, you will see that there's a lot of innovative approaches in there, but the challenge in these approaches is that they have been tailorized. It's special technology. So for instance, the project that won that award last year actually shows fill finish in one line with universal grippers and no format parts, which is part of what we need to get the flexibility of manufacturing of very different products without major change over time. It's a very good example. I think the bad news is that it had to be tailored, a very special line made for this purpose, But the good news is that we need concepts like this to inspire us to start designing the aseptic facility of the future in order to get the flexibility and agility that will be expected from us. Now, I think there is a need to move from customization into standard equipment. And I know some of the biggest vendors are starting to have some concepts. Some of the small, innovative machine suppliers have some very, very interesting concepts going forward. And there are several enablers that we'll come back to. But the key thing is when we put them all together, there should be a change in the paradigm. And it should not just be isolated out-of-the-box thinkings, but be part of a mainstream trend towards what we need in the aseptic processing area going forward. But I know we have several enablers of technology. I mean, we are behind in using robots, but there are several robots out there. We are behind in single-use technology, many opportunities. Other types of sterilization like e-beam is important. The use of Internet of Things and Industry 4.0 technologies are enablers even for existing machines and existing equipment. The ballroom thinking of closed systems, consequent closed systems, is going to be very important, hand-in-hand ballroom and closed systems. Continuous manufacturing is important, and the ability to make more intelligent products that will be expected from us in the future, where a drug delivery system is not only delivering a drug, but also monitoring our health conditions is one of the future expectations. On top of that, we see some prefab kits of equipment that is enabling rapid change over time. We see the ready-to-use trays of pre-sterilized and ready-to-use equipment, primary packaging materials. We see platform technologies in drug delivery systems, and we're starting to see these integrated sensors into even drug delivery systems like closed-loop pumps, insulin pumps, and so on, where we start to see much more advanced technologies than we had in the past. And it is about time, because this is the market expectation to us, and we are behind. I mean, there are other areas of manufacturing using clean rooms, even cleaner rooms than we have in our industry. They have started using robots many years ago. They don't allow humans at all in the manufacturing areas. So everything has been robotized. And I think there's a lot to learn from these electronic areas, semiconductors, aerospace, and so on. There's a lot to learn, and we don't have to reinvent the wheels ourselves. We can start applying and learn from some of these suppliers, some of these industries. So, when we put it all together, there is a sign of disruption in the future of sterile products manufacturing. There are a number of rare diseases coming. There is a number of existing products that are having increased indications for certain patient areas. There are more and more of these orphan drugs coming on the market, and more diseases that are becoming treatable, and there are faster and faster drug approvals, and I think all of these three trends will continue in the next years to come. The big problem is to meet the regulatory expectations on quality, because the dream of Thomas Arista to have a completely automated aseptic filling process with no human intervention is not fulfilled, and can only be fulfilled by using special and tailored solution, which I think is a challenge for us going forward. So I think that the sterile products manufacturing in 2025 has to be very different from what we see today. As a matter of fact, I think you may be able to compare the past with the future if you look into what a harbor was looking like 100 years ago compared to what is a harbor looking like today. I think the container shipping changed everything in the whole transport area, especially in shipping. And I think the container thinking is also driving significant changes in aseptic processing going forward. It's not the only driver. I mentioned many of them, but I think it today is possible to create a very similar situation where nobody is handling individual glass containers, They're all being handled in trays. They're pre-sterilized. They see no human intervention during the whole manufacturing process, and they're kept in closed systems that could even be in ballrooms of, maybe it could be controlled not classified, or if you don't want to challenge the regulators, keep them in Class D. But even Class D is much more flexible than having humans working in Class A. You can come a long way in totally eliminating human intervention, either by isolators or by advanced wraps, as some companies have been showing, advanced ways of ensuring that there is no product contact from the operator to the product. So with that being said, I want to thank you for your attention. We have time for questions, and if you have additional questions, feel free to email me on my email address below. And let's spend a few minutes on discussion here at the end. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Gert. As Gert mentioned, if you've got any questions for Gert, then please send them through to us via the questions tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll ask them to him. So the first question we have, do you expect that orphan drugs will continue to grow faster than the average pharma market?
Yes, I think so. And I think there are signs confirming it, because I follow the industry and the new drug approvals on a daily basis, and I think we still continue to see a number of potential indications being treated, and we see that these breakthroughs have not ended at all. I think it will continue to be a major growth driver in the pharmaceutical industry, and I think it's a mid-step towards the ultimate challenge that we are facing, namely this about the personalized medicine, where we're down to the level of a patient group of only one for each of the variants of the products. So yes, I think it is a megatrend, and I think it's confirmed on a daily basis that this is a major growth driver of the pharmaceutical industry going forward, and a major manufacturing challenge for all of us sometimes in the future.
Great. Our next question, do we have the technology available today that will be needed for future sterile product manufacturing?
I think we have the technology elements, and in that regard, we have the technology, but we need to connect the dots. Nobody has really connected the dots and shown this facility of the future where all our dreams, or all the dreams of Thomas Arista that I mentioned, are brought together. We've seen attempts to make a totally integrated facility with no human intervention, but we haven't come a long way yet, and it's not at all mainstream. So yes, I think we have the technologies, but not enough. We need more technology, and we need to connect the dots to truly see this breakthrough.
Great. Thanks. Just as a reminder, if you've got any questions for Gert, then please send them through by the questions tab. So the next question, do you expect a trend towards faster drug approvals in the future?
Yes, I think so. I think, again, there are many signs that 2017 was a special year to compared to previous years, the record number of new drugs being approved. But I think it's probably too early to have the statistics, but I think there is a clear trend towards faster drug approvals, especially for breakthrough drugs that meets unmet medical needs. There's a high degree of willingness for the major regulatory authorities to meet the market needs of bringing these innovative products to the market faster. And I think when you hear signals from the FDA with the current FDA administration, it's very clear that it's a high priority area for them to enable faster drug approvals, and they are even promoting how they are playing an active role in getting some of these new and innovative drugs to the market. So yes, I think all the stars are lined up for faster drug approvals, but I think from a manufacturing point of view, we probably have a big challenge in that area. And let me add a personal remark to that, because you may not know it, but some of the fast track approvals that companies get is under the condition that the company will be able to supply the market. And sometimes for these innovative drugs, the ability to have the established capacity or find a flexible contract manufacturer that can help bring the product to the market is a major challenge for the innovative pharmaceutical companies. And I think that will be even more so in the future. So I think it's a good time for equipment suppliers that can make flexible and agile equipment, and also for contract manufacturers that can meet this goal of agile and flexible manufacturing that live up to regulatory expectations. Yes, absolutely.
Many thanks. So that seems like all the questions that we have today. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our presenter, Gert Moelgaard, for sharing his knowledge with us. Audiences can view this webinar on demand by visiting biopharma-asia.com/webinars. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.